But in the new order, ancient bloodlines and inherited wealth meant nothing. Positions were filled based on competence and elected through genuine democratic processes. Some Ziridians adapted, learning to compete fairly and contribute meaningfully. Others retreated to their homeworld, unable to function without their traditional advantages. The Vorthak faced perhaps the greatest challenge. Their entire identity was built around being the wise, ancient guardians of galactic civilization. Suddenly finding themselves as just one voice among hundreds was a devastating blow to their collective ego. Some Vorthak embraced the change, like philosopher Zarthel, who became one of the Assembly's most effective mediators. "I have learned more about wisdom in 10 years of democratic debate than in 1,000 years of isolated contemplation," he admitted to human colleagues. Others couldn't adapt and slowly withdrew from galactic affairs entirely, choosing isolation over equality. The real success stories came from species that had been oppressed under the old system. The aquatic Delari, previously ignored because they couldn't breathe air, became leaders in underwater terraforming projects. The spark dancers, dismissed as primitive because they had no physical bodies, proved invaluable in quantum computing. "Research. We're not building an empire," Kim reminded her staff during one of their regular planning sessions. "We're building something that's never existed before. A civilization where everyone truly has a chance to reach their potential." The galaxy was changing, one world at a time. Ambassador Choi Ji-won stepped off the transport shuttle and into the bustling central plaza of New Geneva Station, still amazed after all these years by what humanity had built. The massive orbital facility stretched for kilometers in every direction, its living walls pulsing gently with bioluminescent patterns that helped different species navigate through the complex. 50 years had passed since the formation of the Galactic Democratic Federation, and the transformation was beyond anything the old council could have imagined. Where once rigid bureaucracy had strangled progress, now innovation flourished in ways that seemed almost magical. "Grandpa Choi," called out a young voice, and Ji-won turned to see his grandson running toward him. But running wasn't quite the right word. Little Park Min-woo was floating through the air, his movements perfectly adapted to the station's variable gravity zones. Following behind him came an even more remarkable sight, a group of children from dozens of different species, all playing together in perfect harmony. There was Zixeling, a young Tenthari whose tentacles could change color to match her emotions. Next to her floated Spark Child Lumi, whose energy form danced around the others like living starlight. Even a young Kethmore named Click7 participated, his individual personality now allowed to develop freely outside the old hive mind restrictions. "Watch this," Minwoo called out, activating one of the playground's gravity fields. The children laughed as they experienced the different gravitational conditions of various worlds, the heavy pull of high-gravity planets, the gentle float of low-gravity moons, even the sideways gravity of rotating habitats. This was the new galaxy, where differences were celebrated rather than suppressed, where every species could contribute their unique perspectives to the greater whole. Ji-won made his way through the commercial district, where the transformation was even more obvious. Ziridian crystal singers performed alongside human musicians, their crystalline voices creating harmonies that touched the soul. Vorthak philosophers taught classes on ancient wisdom to eager students from species they had once considered beneath their notice. In the research labs, Dr. Kim Se-hee worked with a team that would have been impossible under the old system. Delari aquatic biologists collaborating with NEF atmospheric specialists and human geneticists to develop new forms of life that could thrive in previously impossible environments. We've successfully created a hybrid ecosystem that can survive in the vacuum of space, she explained to Ji-won during his tour. These organisms will allow us to terraform dead systems without the massive infrastructure, projects that used to be necessary. The results of such cooperation were visible throughout the galaxy. Dead worlds that had been written off as lost causes now bloomed with life. The wasteland that had once been New Seoul was now a garden paradise, its poisoned soil transformed into fertile ground through the combined efforts of dozens of species. Extinct species walked again on worlds that remembered them. The Kithara, those gentle plant beings who had been wiped out by territorial disputes, now tended vast crystalline forests on 17 different worlds. The singers of Melody Prime filled the airwaves once again, their haunting songs now backed by the harmonic contributions of allied species. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in exploration itself. Where the old council had been content to map known space and exploit familiar resources, the new Federation pushed constantly outward. Human-designed ships, crewed by mixed-species teams, ventured beyond the galactic rim to explore regions that had never known intelligent life. "We've made contact with 3 new civilizations this year alone," reported Captain O'Hagin, fresh back from a deep space mission. "And instead of trying to conquer or exploit them, we're helping them develop their own democratic institutions." The old council chambers, now preserved as a museum, elderly Vorthak historian Zelthara studied exhibits that told the true story of the exile and its aftermath. The displays didn't hide the council's mistakes or humanity's suffering. They showed everything with brutal honesty. "We banished them as conquerors," she whispered to her human guide, Dr. Han Yuna, as they looked at holographic records of the original exile decree. "But they returned as gardeners." Dr. Han smiled with the sadness of someone who remembered the pain that had led to this wisdom. "We learned that true power isn't about ruling over others. It's about lifting them up. The galaxy taught us that lesson through 3 centuries of exile, and it was the most valuable education we ever received." Outside the museum, through the vast transparisteel windows, they could see the launch bays where the Federation's newest ships were preparing for departure. These weren't warships or merchant vessels. They were exploration craft designed for humanity's most ambitious project yet. The journey to neighboring galaxies was beginning, carrying with it the message that had transformed their own corner of the universe, that no species should stand alone in the vast darkness of space, and that cooperation could achieve what force never could. The exile was truly over. In its place had come something infinitely better, an age of cooperation that would echo across the cosmos for generations to come. Within hours, the extinction-level threat was contained. The surviving devourers fled back toward the galactic rim, their hunger finally matched by a force they couldn't consume. The galaxy was saved, but by the very people they had cast out in fear and hatred. The implications would reshape everything they thought they knew about power, justice, and what it truly meant to be civilized. The massive doors of the council chamber had been sealed for 3 days straight as the surviving leadership tried to figure out what to do about their unexpected saviors. When those doors suddenly opened without permission, every being in the room turned to see who dared interrupt their emergency session. Admiral Park Minju walked in like she owned the place, her presence filling the vast chamber in a way that made the ancient walls seem smaller. Behind her came a small group of humans, and the council members gasped at what they saw. These weren't the same species they had banished 3 centuries ago. The humans were taller now, their bodies lean, and graceful in a way that spoke of generations spent in zero gravity. Their skin had a subtle luminescence, adapted to the cosmic radiation of deep space. But it was their eyes that truly unsettled the council, deep, knowing eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of someone who had stared into the void and emerged, stronger. "You exiled us as children," Minju said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber without needing amplification. "We return as adults." Council Prime Velthara, the ancient Vortak leader, managed to find his voice first. "You have no authority here. This chamber is sacred ground, forbidden to humans," Minju interrupted gently. "I seem to recall that we just saved your sacred ground from being consumed by cosmic parasites. Perhaps the old rules need updating." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in millennia, the council had been challenged in their own seat of power, and they had no idea how to respond. What happened next wasn't conquest. It was something far more devastating to the council's pride. It was a demonstration of competence that made their centuries of rule look like amateur hour. Captain Kim Jiwoo appeared on screens throughout the galaxy, standing in the ruins of what had been the Talaxian refugee camps. "These people have been living without proper sanitation for 40 years, she reported matter-of-factly. "We'll have clean water, food distribution, and temporary housing established within 6 hours." And they did. Human engineering crews worked with impossible efficiency, their technology turning poisoned wastelands into habitable environments, faster than council bureaucrats could file paperwork. Diseases that had plagued entire species for generations were cured with treatments that seemed almost magical in their effectiveness. Dr. Yoon Se-hyun stood in a medical facility on Kepler Prime, watching children play who had been born with genetic defects that council medicine couldn't treat. "The cellular repair sequence is complete," she told their amazed parents. "Your children will live normal, healthy lives." But perhaps most impressive were the diplomatic breakthroughs. Conflicts that had raged for decades were resolved in days by human negotiators who approached problems with fresh perspectives unclouded by ancient prejudices. Ambassador Lee So-min addressed the fractured council with the patience of a teacher, explaining basic concepts to slow students. "You ruled through fear and tradition," she said, not unkindly. "We offer something better, competence earned through hardship." The impact on the old power structure was immediate and devastating. The Vorthak, who had maintained authority through mystique and ancient wisdom, found their ethereal pronouncements ignored in favor of practical human solutions. Faced with irrelevance, most retreated to their homeworld, pulling back from galactic affairs for the first time in recorded history. The Zeridian corporate empire, built on monopolies and exploitation, began fracturing as human trade offered fair alternatives. When species could get better goods at honest prices from human merchants, the crystal beings' stranglehold on commerce crumbled almost overnight. Most shocking was what happened to the Kethmore. The hive mind that had existed for millions of years began developing cracks as individual members started thinking independent thoughts. Exposure to human concepts of individual worth and personal choice awakened something in them that their collective consciousness had suppressed. I have my own opinion," whispered one Kethmore drone, the words shocking their entire collective. "I disagree with the hive decision about agricultural policy. It was the beginning of the end for their ancient unity and the birth of something unprecedented. Kethmore individuals, species that had suffered under council oppression, didn't need to be conquered or convinced to join humanity's cause. They flocked to human-administered zones voluntarily, drawn by the promise of fair treatment and genuine protection. The Havanites, who had survived in hidden colonies after their official relocation, emerged from hiding to join human relief efforts. The aquatic Delari, tired of being dismissed by land-dwelling council members, found their voices finally heard in human forums. "They're not our new masters," explained Elder Zixara of the Tenthari species to her worried council. "They're our partners. There's a difference. The old galaxy was dead. In its place, something entirely new was being born, not through force or intimidation, but through the simple revolutionary act of treating everyone with dignity and respect." The children had indeed returned as adults, and they were teaching the galaxy what true civilization looked like. The construction of New Geneva Station took place in neutral space, far from any homeworld that might give one species an advantage over another. Director Kim Yoona watched through the observation deck as thousands of workers from dozens of different species collaborated on humanity's most ambitious project yet. A massive orbital facility that would house the first truly democratic government the galaxy had ever seen. "Are you sure about this?" asked her advisor, Captain Lee Min-seo, as they watched a group of methane-breathing Neph working alongside oxygen-dependent Zeridians. "No species in galactic history has ever willingly shared power like this." Kim smiled, remembering the lessons humanity had learned during their long exile. "That's exactly why we're doing it. The old way of ruling through force and fear is what got the galaxy into this mess in the first place. The Galactic Democratic Assembly was unlike anything that had come before. Instead of a few powerful species dictating terms to everyone else, every single species, no matter how small or seemingly primitive, was given an equal voice. The tiny spark dancers, energy beings barely visible to most organic life, sat alongside the massive stone singers, whose bodies were literally living mountains. "Every voice matters," Kim declared to the assembled representatives on opening day. Every species has value, regardless of your technology level, your population size, or how long you've been traveling among the stars. The translation devices worked overtime as hundreds of different languages filled the chamber. Some species communicated through color changes, others through scent, and a few through quantum fluctuations that existed outside normal space-time. Humanity's advanced technology made it all possible, creating a true universal translator that could bridge any communication gap. But technology sharing came with firm conditions that humanity refused to negotiate. Chief Technology Advisor Dr. Park Jisoo made the rules crystal clear. We'll share everything we've learned during our exile, but weapons of mass destruction are absolutely forbidden. We've seen what happens when advanced civilizations turn their tools toward destruction. Environmental restoration was another non-negotiable requirement. Every species that wanted access to human terraforming technology had to commit to healing the damage their ancestors had caused. Captain Jung Hein led these restoration efforts, watching with satisfaction as poisoned worlds slowly returned to life. "Look at this," she said to her team as they reviewed progress reports from former mining worlds. "Kepler-7's atmosphere is almost breathable again. The Zeridians stripped it down to bedrock 50 years ago, but our bioengineers have managed to restart the entire ecosystem. The work wasn't just about fixing environmental damage. It was about bringing back species that the old council had allowed to die out. Using genetic samples preserved in abandoned research stations and tissue recovered from archaeological sites, human biotechnology began the incredible process of resurrection." Dr. Shin Jaemin stood in his laboratory, watching as the first Kithara, seedling in 2 centuries, slowly unfurled its crystalline leaves. "We're not just restoring extinct species," he explained to visitors. "We're giving them the chance to evolve beyond what they were before, to become something better suited for this new galaxy." The former council species struggled with this new reality in different ways. The Zeridians, who had built their entire civilization around economic manipulation and bought influence, found themselves completely out of their element in a system based on merit and genuine contribution. "This is absurd," complained Trade Coordinator Silvex, his crystalline form flickering with frustration. "My family has controlled shipping routes for 3,000 years. That should count for something." "Council records show they were relocated for administrative efficiency," replied intelligence specialist Kim Dongjun, his voice dripping with disgust. "Moved to a single planet with inadequate resources. The last entry is from 40 years. Hygo, their population had dropped to fewer than 10,000. Another species quietly erased from existence, victims of bureaucratic indifference. It was a pattern they were seeing everywhere. Navigator An Yejin worked at her station, cross-referencing their current observations with 300-year-old star charts. What she found made her stomach turn. "Commander, you need to see this," she called out, her hands shaking as she transferred data to the main display. The image that appeared showed 2 versions of the same world, before and after. The before picture showed New Seoul, a beautiful human colony world with sprawling cities, green parks, and crystal-clear oceans. It had been home to 12 million humans and was considered one of the crown jewels of human civilization. The after picture showed a dead rock. "The Zeridians," Anne explained, her voice thick with emotion. "They strip-mined the entire planet, tore apart the mountains, drained the oceans, poisoned the atmosphere. According to their mining reports, they extracted significant mineral wealth over a period of 50 years. Captain Ryu Tai-hyung, who was commanding the escort vessel Promise of Tomorrow, had been born on New Seoul. His parents had evacuated him during the exile when he was just a baby. Now he was looking at the grave of his birthplace. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the cherry blossoms in Central Park," he said quietly over the comlink. "She said they bloomed pink and white every spring, and children would have picnics under the trees." The main display now showed the area where Central Park had been. It was a crater half a mile deep, filled with toxic sludge. 300 years we've been gone," Ryu continued, his voice growing harder, "and they've managed to destroy everything we helped build." The systematic survey continued for weeks, and each new discovery was worse than the last. The Vorthak, once mysterious but generally benevolent guardians, had become tyrannical overlords. They had established guidance centers on dozens of worlds, facilities that were essentially re-education camps where species deemed primitive were forced to abandon their cultures and adopt Vorthak ways. The Zeridians had transformed from respected traders into predatory corporations. They monopolized trade routes, charged extortionate fees for basic necessities, and exploited smaller species without mercy. Their corporate fleets were larger than many military forces, and they used them to enforce their economic stranglehold. Most shocking of all was what had happened to the Kethmor. The once unified hive mind had fractured into competing factions, each claiming to represent the true collective consciousness. These factions warred constantly, their conflicts spilling over onto innocent worlds and turning entire star systems into battlefields. "Sir, we're detecting massive refugee camps in the Outer Rim," reported sensor operator Li Jisoo. "Looks like millions of displaced beings living in temporary shelters. Some of these camps appear to have been there for decades." Nam studied the data with growing horror. These weren't temporary emergency facilities. They were permanent slums, where undesirable species had been dumped and forgotten. The conditions were appalling, with inadequate food, water, and medical care. "The Council used to pride themselves on maintaining galactic order," observed Chief Science Officer Park Mik-young. "This isn't order, it's systematic oppression." The reconnaissance revealed a galaxy that was rotting from within. Corruption was endemic, justice was for sale, and the strong preyed on the weak without consequence. The careful balance that had once maintained peace was gone, replaced by a brutal hierarchy where might made right. But perhaps most concerning was how vulnerable it all was. The Council's military was outdated and divided. Their technology had stagnated. Their leaders were more concerned with internal power struggles than external threats. "They're sitting ducks," Nam reported to Admiral Im Sung-ho. "A strong wind could knock over this house of cards." The galaxy that had exiled humanity was no longer worthy of the name civilized. The first warning came from a deep space monitoring station on the Galactic Rim. Sensor operator Yim Hyeju was finishing her night shift when something impossible appeared on her screens. Massive dark shapes moving through space, too large to be ships, too organized to be natural phenomena. "Control, this is Outpost 7, she transmitted, her voice shaking. "I'm reading multiple contacts approaching from beyond the rim. Size estimates are... This can't be right. These things are bigger than moons." The response from headquarters was predictably dismissive. "Outpost 7, check your equipment. You're probably seeing asteroid clusters or cosmic debris." But Hyeju wasn't seeing debris. She was watching the arrival of something that would make the galaxy's petty political squabbles seem like children's games. The Devourers moved through space like a living nightmare. They weren't ships in any traditional sense. They were organisms, massive creatures that existed in the void between stars. Their bodies pulsed with an alien hunger, tentacles stretching for light years as they fed on the energy of stars themselves. Within hours of their arrival, entire star systems went dark. The creatures didn't just destroy planets, they consumed them completely, converting matter into energy to fuel their endless appetite. Worlds that had existed for billions of years vanished as if they had never been, leaving behind only empty space and the echoing screams of the dying. Council Admiral Seo Gunwoo commanded the Outer Rim Defense Fleet, a collection of aging vessels that had been designed more for show than actual combat. When the emergency call came through, he led his ships toward the threat with confidence that quickly turned to terror. "Open fire," he ordered as his fleet approached the lead devourer. "All weapons, maximum power." The Council's most advanced weapons, plasma cannons that could shatter asteroids, quantum torpedoes that could crack moons, struck the creature's hide and simply disappeared. The energy was absorbed, feeding the beast rather than harming it. "Sir, our weapons aren't even scratching them," reported his tactical officer, Commander Oh Seung-wan. "If anything, we're making them stronger." The Devourer's response was swift and terrible. Tentacles of living darkness reached out, wrapping around Council ships and crushing them like tin cans. Admiral Seo watched in horror as half his fleet was destroyed in seconds, their crews consumed along with their vessels. "All ships, fall back," he ordered desperately. "We're retreating to the inner systems." But retreat only delayed the inevitable. The Devourers followed, their hunger growing with each world they consumed. Panic spread through Council space faster than the creatures themselves. Refugee ships clogged hyperspace lanes as entire populations fled toward the galactic core. The mighty Vorthak, who had ruled through fear and ancient wisdom for millennia, found their ethereal powers useless against entities that existed partially, outside normal space-time. Their homeworld's dimensional shields, which had protected them since the dawn of civilization, were torn apart like paper. "Offer them tribute," suggested Zeridian corporate leader Veltar, his crystalline form flickering. "With desperation. Rare metals, energy crystals, entire star systems if necessary." But the Devourers recognized no currency except consumption. They devoured the tribute ships along with everything else, their appetite seemingly endless. The Kethmor's collective consciousness, which had never known fear as individual beings understood it, experienced terror for the first time. Their hive mind recoiled from contact with the alien hunger, the psychic scream of consumed worlds, driving many of their members insane. Hope was dying along with entire civilizations when the impossible happened. Space itself seemed to tear open, near the galactic core, reality folding like origami, as vessels emerged from dimensions that shouldn't exist. These weren't the crude, bulky ships of Council design. They were works of art that moved through space like living poetry. Fleet Admiral Park Minju stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dawn, watching tactical displays that showed the scope of the disaster. Her great-grandfather had been exiled from this galaxy centuries ago, but she felt no satisfaction at seeing their former oppressors brought low. "All ships, this is Fleet Admiral Park Minju of the Human Expeditionary Force," she broadcast on all frequencies, her voice calm and confident. "We're here to help." The response from Council forces was a mixture of disbelief, hope, and desperation. Humans? Here? After 3 centuries of exile, they had returned at the galaxy's darkest hour. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of how far humanity had evolved. Human weapons didn't simply destroy the Devourers, they unraveled them at the quantum level, turning cosmic horrors back into harmless energy. Dimensional prison fields trapped the creatures in pocket universes where they could feed only on themselves. The parasitic swarms that had consumed entire fleets found themselves outmaneuvered by ships that could exist in multiple dimensions. Simultaneously, human vessels phased in and out of reality, striking from impossible angles before disappearing again. Seohyun shook her head sadly. This same argument had been raging for months now, with no end in sight. Before the exile, humans had often served as mediators in such disputes. Their unpredictable nature had somehow made them perfect negotiators. Neither side could manipulate them easily, so both sides trusted them to be fair. Now, with humans gone, every disagreement became a potential war. General Zhang Wujin of the gas giant-dwelling Neph species hovered nearby in his pressure suit, his methane-based biology requiring special accommodations. He was one of the newer council members, representing species that had joined after humanity's banishment. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to Seohyun through their private communication channel. "Half these regulations were written by oxygen breathers for oxygen breathers. Why should my people follow atmospheric safety protocols that would actually kill us?" The Neph weren't alone in their frustration. Dozens of species had been forced to conform to standards that made no sense for their biology or culture. The Council's laws had been written by the 3 founding races, the Zeridians, Vorthak, and Kethmor, with little consideration for anyone else's needs. The Vorthak had become particularly insufferable since humanity's exile. These ethereal beings, existing partially in another dimension, had always considered themselves superior to physical species. Without humans to challenge their authority, they had grown more arrogant and dismissive than ever. "Your concerns are noted," the Vorthak representative said dismissively to a delegation of silicon-based life forms. "However, our ancient wisdom suggests that your species would benefit from adopting more traditional approaches to governance. Traditional approaches that happen to benefit the Vorthak, of course. The real problems began at the edges of civilized space. Pirate fleets, once kept in check by regular patrols, grew bolder as council ships were pulled away to deal with internal disputes. Trade routes that had been safe for centuries became hunting grounds for raiders and smugglers. Captain Ryu Taiwu of the Dalari Defense Force found himself stretched impossibly thin. "We've lost 3 cargo vessels this week alone," he reported to his superiors. "The Crimson Nebula pirates are hitting convoys almost daily, and we don't have enough ships to patrol all the trade routes." The situation was made worse by bureaucratic incompetence. Requests for additional patrol ships had to be approved by 17 different committees, each representing different species' interests. By the time approval came through, the pirates had usually moved on to new hunting grounds, but the most tragic consequence was the quiet extinction of smaller species. The Kithara, gentle plant-like beings who had relied on human protection from aggressive neighbors, were wiped out in a territorial dispute that the Council was too busy to mediate. The crystalline singers of Melody Prime fell silent forever. When their homeworld was strip-mined by Zeridian corporations, their protests buried in legal paperwork, these extinctions barely made the news. Without human advocacy groups to raise awareness, smaller species simply disappeared from the galactic stage, their voices unheard and their losses unmourned. Ambassador Li Yejin, one of the few beings who remembered humanity fondly, kept a private memorial in her quarters. Photos of extinct species lined the walls, dozens of unique civilizations that had vanished since the exile. "They called humans chaotic," she whispered to herself, looking at images of the peaceful Kithara. But at least humans cared about protecting the weak. The galaxy was discovering that chaos and caring often came together, and without one, you couldn't have the other. Intelligence Officer Moon Hajin sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts and incident reports. The data streaming across her screens would have seemed like science fiction to her grandparents, but to her, it was just another day of trying to make sense of the impossible. The reports had started trickling in 6 months ago. Strange sightings, at the very edge of civilized space. Merchant captains spoke of ships that appeared out of nowhere, vessels with hull designs unlike anything in the galactic database. These mysterious craft would appear briefly on sensors before vanishing again, leaving behind only confused witnesses and more questions than answers. "Look at this one," she muttered to herself, pulling up a report from Captain Kim Sionho of the trading vessel Prosperity. "Says he was attacked by raiders near the Omega Nebula. His ship was about to be destroyed when another vessel appeared and drove off the pirates. When he tried to hail his rescuer, they just disappeared." The description was frustratingly vague, like all the others. The rescue ship was sleek, almost organic in design, with energy signatures that didn't match any known technology. It had weapons that could disable pirate vessels without destroying them, and stealth capabilities that made it invisible to even military-grade sensors. Moon picked up another report, this one from a Zeridian mining operation. Strange signals had been detected in deep space. Not random cosmic noise, but organized patterns that almost seemed like language. The signals lasted for exactly 37 minutes before cutting off completely. When investigation teams arrived at the source coordinates, they found nothing but empty space. Probably pirates with stolen tech, Council Security Chief Kang Hyunwoo had said when she brought him the reports. His dismissive attitude frustrated her, but she understood why he wanted simple explanations. The galaxy had enough problems without chasing ghosts in the void, but Moon had a feeling these weren't ghosts. The patterns were too consistent, too organized. Someone was out there watching and waiting. The question was who and what did they want? 300 light-years away, Captain Oh Ji-yeon smiled as she reviewed the same reports from her hidden observation post. Her ship, the Shadow Walker, hung motionless in the cosmic darkness between star systems, its advanced stealth fields making it completely invisible to Council sensors. "They still think like they did 3 centuries ago," she said to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Choi Jinwan. "Same patrol routes, same communication protocols, same blind spots. It's almost too easy." The human reconnaissance vessel was a masterpiece of engineering born from desperation and genius. 300 years of exile had forced humanity to innovate in ways the comfortable Council species never could. While they maintained their ancient technology, Humans had been forced to reinvent everything from scratch. The results were remarkable. Human ships could fold space-time itself, allowing them to travel vast distances instantaneously. Their hulls were grown rather than built, using organic materials that could heal damage and adapt to different environments. Their weapons were precise enough to disable rather than destroy, surgical tools rather than blunt instruments. "Sir, we're picking up another council patrol," reported the sensor operator, Ensign Park Jiwoo. 3 ships, standard formation, heading toward the Yi. "Mining colonies." Oh, watched the patrol on her tactical display, noting their predictable patterns. The council vessels moved like they were performing a parade drill, rather than conducting a real security sweep. Their sensors were outdated, their weapons ancient by human standards, their tactics unchanged since before the exile. "They've grown." "Soft," she reported later to Admiral Im Sung-ho via quantum communication. 3 centuries of unchallenged authority have made them lazy. Their military is more ceremonial than functional. If we wanted to conquer them, we could do it in a matter of weeks. But conquest wasn't the plan. Admiral Im had made that clear to all reconnaissance teams. Humanity had learned hard lessons during their exile, and one of the most important was patience. They had waited 300 years for this moment. They could wait a little longer to do it right. The old humanity would have charged in with guns blazing, demanding justice for their exile. But the new humanity was different. They had learned subtlety, strategy, and the power of appearing weak when you were actually strong. "Continue observation," Im ordered. "Document everything, their weaknesses, their strengths, their internal conflicts. When we finally reveal ourselves, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with." The galaxy would learn soon enough that the exiled humans had returned, but when that revelation came, it would be on humanity's terms, not theirs. Fleet Commander. Nam Jun-woo stood on the bridge of the reconnaissance vessel Deep Horizon, watching holographic displays show the galaxy he had only heard about in stories. This was humanity's first real look at their former home in 3 centuries, and what they were seeing broke his heart. "Scanning complete on Sector 12, reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Bai Minho. "No signs of the Havanites. According to our records, there should be a thriving colony of 3 million here." Nam pulled up the historical data. The Havanites had been gentle, artistic people who created beautiful sculptures from crystallized starlight. Humans had helped them establish trade relationships and protected them from aggressive neighbors. Now their worlds were empty, their cities crumbling ruins slowly being reclaimed by alien vegetation. "What happened to them?" asked Communications Officer Song Yuna, her voice barely above a whisper. Admiral Park Ji-ho's boots echoed through the Grand Council chambers as he walked toward the judgment seat. The massive hall stretched above him like a cathedral, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with alien light. This was it, humanity's final moment before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The Zeridians floated in their crystal forms, their bodies glowing brighter with each passing second. They were enjoying this. Park could see it in the way their light danced. They had waited centuries for this moment. Behind them, the ghostly Vorthak whispered in their ancient language, their translucent forms barely visible against the chamber's ethereal glow. But it was the Kethmore that truly unnerved him. Thousands of insect-like beings stood in perfect formation, their hive mind speaking as one voice. When they made decisions, every single member knew instantly. There was no debate, no discussion, just cold, calculated judgment. Commander Lee Min-ho stood beside Park, his jaw tight with anger. They had prepared for this day, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer arrogance radiating from the council. These beings saw themselves as gods among mortals and humanity. They were just another problem to be solved. "The human species," began the Council Prime, its voice booming through translation devices, "has proven itself unworthy of civilized society. Your wars, your greed, your constant need to expand and conquer, these traits make you a cancer in our peaceful galaxy." Park stepped forward. "Honorable Council, we come seeking understanding. Yes, we've made mistakes, but we've also brought innovation, art, and friendship to countless worlds. Give us another chance to prove silence." The word crashed through, the chamber like thunder. The crystalline walls shimmered with the force of it. Your kind destroyed 3 solar systems in your expansion wars. You turned peaceful trade routes into battlegrounds. Wherever humans go, chaos follows. Lee Minho couldn't hold back anymore. And what about the Zeridian mining operations that poisoned entire worlds? What about the Vorthax slave markets? You're not exactly saints yourselves. The Council Prime's form grew larger, more imposing. We have evolved beyond such primitive behaviors. We maintain order. You bring only destruction. The trial, if it could even be called that, was over before it began. The decision had been made long before Park and his delegation ever set foot in the chamber. The evidence was ignored, the witnesses dismissed, the pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. Captain Kim Dae-hyun watched from the gallery as the sentence was pronounced. Every human colony, every ship, every trace of human presence would be removed from civilized space within 6 months. Those who resisted would be destroyed. It was exile or extinction, no other choice. Lieutenant Bai So-young stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. How can they do this to us? We have families, children, entire civilizations built over generations. Dae-hyun's hands shook with rage. Because they can. Because we're outnumbered and outgunned. Because in their eyes we're not even worth considering as equals. The evacuation began immediately. Human colonies that had thrived for centuries were abandoned overnight. Families were torn from their homes, forced to pack whatever they could carry. Ships designed for exploration and trade were converted into refugee vessels, cramped and desperate. The galaxy watched in silence as humanity was herded toward the rim like cattle. Some species felt guilt, others relief. Many simply didn't care. It wasn't their problem anymore. As the last human transport ship crossed the galactic boundary, the Council Prime made one final announcement. Let this serve as a warning to all species. Those who cannot embrace peace and order have no place among the civilized worlds. The Great Exile was complete. Humanity was alone in the dark space between galaxies, cast out and forgotten. But they had underestimated human resilience, human ingenuity, and most importantly, human memory. They would remember this day. They would remember every injustice, every broken promise, every moment of suffering. And someday, somehow, they would return. The darkness between galaxies was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. Dr. Yoon Ji-hai pressed her face against the observation deck window, staring out at the vast emptiness that had become their prison. 300 years had passed since the exile, and still the loneliness cut deep into every human soul. Her research station, New Hope, was one of hundreds scattered across the void. What had once been a proud fleet of exploration vessels was now a desperate collection of makeshift homes, drifting through space like cosmic refugees. The nearest star was so far away, it appeared as nothing more than a dim speck, barely brighter than the distant galaxies that mocked them from the horizon. "Doctor, we've got another problem," called Engineer Han Min-jae from across the cramped laboratory. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion that had become common among their people. Sleep came hard when you knew each day might be your last. Ji-hai turned from the window, her heart already sinking. What is it this time? Life support system in Section C is failing again. We're losing atmosphere faster than we can recycle it. Min-jae wiped sweat from his forehead, his hands stained with the grime of constant repairs. I've patched it 17 times this month. The materials are just wearing out. This was the reality of exile. Every piece of equipment was precious, irreplaceable. When something broke, they couldn't simply order new parts or visit a trading station. They had to make do, improvise, or watch their people slowly die. The early years had been the worst. Entire colonies had vanished into the darkness, their life support failing, their food running out, their hope extinguished like candles in the wind. The lucky ones died quickly. Others drifted for years before the cold finally claimed them. But humans were stubborn creatures. Where other species might have given up, they adapted. They learned. They refused to simply fade away into the cosmic night. "Sir, I think I've found something," announced Lieutenant Park Ji-soo from the communications array. Her excitement was infectious, the first genuine emotion anyone had shown in weeks. "There's an old wreck about 2 light-years from here. Looks like it might have been a mining vessel. Captain Shin Yunbi straightened in her command chair. Any life signs? Negative, but the hull appears intact. If we're lucky, there might be materials we can salvage. This was how humanity survived. Now scavenging from the bones of dead civilizations, picking through the remains of forgotten expeditions. The space between galaxies wasn't completely empty. Ancient species had tried to cross these distances before, and their failures had become humanity's lifelines. The breakthrough came when they stopped trying to go home and started trying to thrive. Dr. Kim Yuna's team cracked the secret of closed-loop ecosystems that could run indefinitely on nothing but starlight and cosmic dust. Engineer Bei Seojun developed fusion reactors that could extract fuel from the vacuum of space itself. But the real revolution was in their minds. Children born in exile didn't remember Earth's blue skies or the warmth of a natural sun. They knew only the cold beauty of deep space, and they made it their own. They became something new, not quite the same species that had been banished centuries ago. These new humans could hold their breath for hours, their bodies adapted to low pressure environments. Their eyes could see deeper into the spectrum, picking out details in the cosmic background radiation that their ancestors never could. Their minds worked differently too, thinking in 3 dimensions, calculating trajectories and gravitational fields as naturally as their forebears had walked on solid ground. "We're not the same people they exiled," whispered Chief Science Officer Lim Dong-yun, watching a group of children play in the zero-gravity recreation pod. They moved like dancers, their bodies perfectly adapted to life among the stars. What the Galactic Council didn't understand was that exile had become evolution. Every hardship had made them stronger. Every loss had taught them resilience. Every generation had surpassed the last, not just in technology, but in determination. They were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. The golden age of galactic peace didn't last long after humanity's exile. What the Council had celebrated as their greatest triumph was slowly revealing itself as their biggest mistake. Without humans to unite against, the carefully balanced alliance began to crumble like a house of cards in a storm. Ambassador Cho Seo-hyun of the aquatic Delari species floated in her specialized environmental suit, watching the heated argument unfold in the council chambers. The crystalline Zeridians were literally glowing red with anger, their bodies pulsing with aggressive light patterns. Across from them, the insect-like Kethmore had formed a defensive cluster, their collective hive mind buzzing with hostile intent. "The mining rights to Sector 7 belong to us by ancient treaty," declared the Zeridian representative, his crystal form crackling with electrical discharge. "Your kind has no claim to those worlds." The Kethmore response came as a unified roar from thousands of throats. "Treaties written when your species was still crawling in caves hold no meaning. We need those resources for our expanding colonies.